Well, hello again. My name is James. I'm the family pastor here at Calvary Spokane, and I'm here with Pastor Ken. And we're just going to talk about his message this weekend and really kind of talk about some questions that are available for you down in the comments section below to really just kind of help us work through these things and how to actually tangibly apply these principles to our life. And so, Ken, I saw these questions this week, and I thought, we're going to enjoy this. You're probably not, because you wrote these questions for us to kind of analyze ourselves. But in this context, it's a little bit an opportunity for us to get to know you a little bit better.
Yeah.
And so the first question you had here, again, the message was on change and how we handle it. But each of us has been significantly impacted by the changes that have taken place over the past few months. I think that's an understatement. Mm-hmm. But can you list 5 positive changes to your life and 5 negative changes? I'll say maybe we won't do 5 and 5, but maybe just give us a couple of positive things that have happened and maybe a couple negative things.
Well, I see a lot of positives in all of it, but that tends to be my disposition. I tend to gravitate towards the upside of things rather than the downside. So I'm not a person who's given a lot to highs and lows and depressions. But that's been interesting because that's one of the things I'll talk about, the negatives. I've experienced more downtimes during this period than I have in the past because, quite honestly, everything has thrown me off balance. We're facing a whole different life, and especially the idea of doing ministry in this kind of format. I like to be in contact with people more than I do with cameras. And I think there's some people who thrive in this kind of environment, but not me. But I think some of the positive sides of it, it really has helped me to really just spend a lot more time reflectively before the Lord. I mean, I think about just even doing the daily devotionals has really driven me to read the Word every day and try to find some nugget that I can share with other people that would encourage them. And so it's been an interesting time. I feel like I've been able to dig a lot deeper into the Word. I think that my wife and I, we've always had a prayer time, or we have for several years, but even at that, our prayer ministry has become much fuller. Our list has gotten longer, and I think it's been more enriching for us. And I think that time that we've spent together has helped us really kind of renew and rekindle some of the intimacy that we have in our own relationship, because quite honestly, our lives are kind of pillar to post. They've been super busy. And so it's like, it's interesting because in a way, I've been really busy. You've been really busy. All the staff has been really busy, and yet I found that we've had more uninterrupted time together, just simply because we're not going out with friends and hanging out and visiting and things of that nature. We've had to really focus on each other, and that's been really good. And it's interesting. It's led to some interesting disagreements. We're like everybody else. We've had our words at times with each other, and we've come to realize that sometimes it's just. There's been a sense sometimes of depression and just the disconnection from people we know and we love has been really difficult to deal with, I think, because we're more used to hanging out. What that's led to is a greater valuing and appreciation of those relationships, because I think in many ways you can't help it. You kind of take advantage that the people around you are always going to be around you. So, I mean, those are some of the things. And then to add to that, I've been able to really connect more with my neighbors, because usually they just see me driving in and out, going back and forth. And, you start talking across the fence and you start having communication with each other because you're just kind of locked down, taking walks down our gravel road. We go by neighbors and we talk. So I've met a lot of people, seen a lot of people. And that's been kind of an interesting thing, because I feel like now I'm more living in a community than just simply a place that I sleep and park my car. No. So those are some of the things I think have been real beneficial. But on the downside, I think I try to share in the daily devotionals some of the things that I go through. It's been hard. It's even when you try to communicate digitally, whether it's verbally or through online, it's easier for people to misinterpret or misunderstand what you're saying. Yeah. And so that's led to a lot more of email communications, more than quite honestly, I have far more than I can even get to. I often like to say to people, it's not like I'm ignoring you, but you have no idea how many of emails and requests for information, help, and direction, and so forth that you get. So I mean, it's just been interesting, because to sum that all up, it has really, been. I've had to change and deal with life in a way that I had never dealt with it before. Yeah. And just going to Costco with a face mask you have no hard idea how difficult that was. So I mean, that's as brief as I can kind of cover it, but I do come at the end of it and I think, God, I thank you for all the things that you have worked in my heart through all of this.
Yeah.
Because there's just a lot of things that I just took for granted. And once those things are gone, you realize, God, it'd be a wonderful grace if you'd let us have those things again. First time I went out to dinner with my wife in Idaho.
Yeah.
I mean, it was just wild. It was like, I felt like it was like the first time we'd ever done this.
Yeah.
So, yeah, you appreciate things again.
Yeah. I think when this whole first thing all started, there was a lot of evaluation. And I think it was the same thing of that freshness of I realized that in a way it was kind of a gift that God had just kind of forced me to have time to evaluate what I was doing, because I think before we came into this season, we were still pillar to post, but just in a different way.
Yeah.
But it was just kind of so busy. And
the pillars were familiar.
Right, right. Yeah. And whether they say familiarity breeds contempt, and whether that's true or not, but I just think that for the first few weeks, I think, and I would say even now, I just found myself doing things that I hadn't done before. I felt that I have the position here at a church where a lot of people know me, but I don't know a lot of people.
Yeah.
I'm so involved in just different events and programs and activities and stuff, but when it actually comes to actually building relationships with people, it just wasn't happening.
Yeah.
And once we took all the programs away, for the first few weeks, that's probably what I spent most of my time doing.
Yeah.
As actually talking to people, and that was great. But I think one thing that you mentioned, the thing about emails, and I think that as we were a lot of time working from home, managing my schedule is something that I don't think I ever got a grasp on. And so while there was a lot of good happening there, the fact that because I was at home, probably one of the negative changes for me is my family life probably didn't get better over this season, just because the kids didn't understand that there's work hours and there's not. I mean, they know where I go and they know where I'm coming but just to understand why they can't come into this room now because I'm doing this. And I just think that there's a connection there, just because I think the long hours, and you said we're tired, we're all tired. When we're tired over a few days or over a week or over months, you just don't function the same.
Yeah.
And you just come in, you just know you're short. I'm short with my kids. I'm short with my wife. And again, the opportunity was there to, I guess, as you said, appreciate. But it depended on what we did in this season, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I don't think there's any of us who don't feel that way or hasn't felt that way. It's just the learning curve when this all happened was fast and steep. And we felt like, compared to a lot of churches, we were already online. We had a lot of the essential equipment. We didn't have to go spend a lot of money or effort to try to get up to speed. And yet we're finding that sometimes people might think that sitting like this and doing this with cameras, there's so much pre-set up and so many things that can go wrong, and we become our own worst critics because we watch ourselves and have to evaluate what we've said and how we look, and all those things that those put such tremendous strains and pressures on us all, and like you say, the thing of getting irritable, getting short, and because my wife made the comment to me, she says, I was just talking with one of the other staff members, and my wife was sharing, I feel like a lot of times I have like this cloud over me, this heaviness, and the other person said, I feel the same way. And I said, well, part of it's probably spiritual. The enemy knows where our weaknesses are and their seasons, but it's also it's the fact that we're going through changes, that we're pretty disoriented, and we feel that absence of relationship in our life far more than we recognized. Loneliness is a powerful dynamic in our life, and you realize that it's wonderful to have a partner in life so you're not totally alone, but there comes a point where you need more input than just them. They run out of gas. And so I think for me and my wife and I think it's really, we've had to address even the issue of just being impatient and getting short with each other, and because we've spent far more time together because I'm working at home all the time.
Yeah.
She says, I see you more, but I interact with you less.
Yeah.
And that's part of my problem. I can't stop working if it's in front of me.
Well, I think said there's always something to do. And
Yeah.
like you said, the endless pile of emails, it's not that I'm neglecting somebody. I just have found that in some cases, there's certain times that I check my email and I have to limit myself to that. Otherwise, I won't get anything else done.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I think that's something I'm going to be continuing to learn even out of this season.
Yeah.
Just having to manage things. And I think that's something that, God really worked on me during this season. I'm hoping it'll continue
Yeah.
into the next one. But, you mentioned some of the changes. The second question that you had here is, what have you done personally to navigate these changes in a positive way?
The best thing I did was and this is something I put in place a while back, but was just simply to start the day with God and His Word. Because I feel like, and sometimes there's so much to be done, it's so easy to just turn on the computer and start going at it. And I found that what happens is I end up doing that, and it's 5 o'clock in the afternoon, and I haven't spent a moment in the Word, and I haven't prayed. And so I learned a long time ago that I have to do this, and it's kind of an act of faith. I have to believe that God will bless the time that I have left if I'll just take time for Him and create that Sabbath right at the very beginning of my day. And so that has been, I think, critically important in the temptation. I said, as the workload and the backlog of things that need to be taken care of just increases, it makes the keeping that sacred that much harder. But I think that's the thing that has saved us, that my wife and I just have that covenant that we start together. We start in the morning with prayer and the Word, and then we try to attack the issues. But I think that, I keep on preaching on that over and over again, but I just think that's, if you get rightly positioned with God first thing in the morning, you'll always be in right disposition towards the day. And that's, I think, it's very, very critically important, in getting my heart in the right position with God, then my disposition will be right through the whole day. And when that's not, then I get cattywampus. I find that, and this is me, I don't know if it's for everybody else, but I find that I also have to just spend time alone contemplating, because the squirrels in my head begin to go a little bit crazy. And I have to be able to step back and start asking myself, okay, why do I feel that way? Why am I thinking that way? What this stress and pressure I'm feeling right now that's not from God. So where's that coming from? And you begin to follow trails of unbelief. So times for personal meditation are pretty important. And I know most people say, well, I just don't have time for that. You know what? Sometimes when you drive to work, before you get out of the car, to spend 5 minutes just simply saying, God, I just want to sit here for a few moments and just position my heart correctly, position my head correctly, so I can have the right disposition, especially if you're in a stressful, trying job. And so, I know that my couple of my kids have jobs that are, I think, mine is stressful. I think, I'm glad they're young, because I couldn't handle it. But at least young from my perspective. But yeah, so I just think that to me is the one central thing that I do, that just making sure that I have plenty of time for Sabbath with God.
No, I think that's so good, because I think in this age that we live in, we're looking for that quick fix, or like, oh, I know, but tell me really what it is.
Yeah.
And it's like, really, it's not difficult. It's not, as they say, rocket science. I would completely agree with you.
Yeah.
The only thing I would say is that in the season of life that I'm in, it's becoming really difficult, because I think you're right. I think some people would say, oh, it doesn't have to be in the morning, it doesn't have to be in this. I just know for me, in the morning is the most important time. And, my kids don't understand this. And so
They're so unspiritual.
I know, right? We've got one problem here, because they go to bed in between like 8 and 9 or something. And then they wake up at like 5:30 now, and I could wake up before then. And if I was going to bed at 8 and 9, there was actually one night this week where I did. I put the kids down, and I'm like, I'm done. I can't do this. But I have found that through all of this, I could go back and mark on the calendar the days that I felt that I was most stable, the ones where I saw things most clearly. And it was definitely the times where I had, as you said, the times of reading and even, meditation, contemplating, like, what is this what does this mean for me,
Yeah.
and how is this going to? And I'll even add on to that too. One thing that, especially during this season, when I was, able as consistently as possible to read, just reading through a proverb a day, and just seeing the wisdom of God in this season. Because as soon as you turn on, your phone, you turn on the TV, you've got just a barrage of opinions of things.
Yeah.
And it was just so good to say, like, this is true, and just really have something to hold on to. But that being said, I think it's something you have to fight for it.
Yeah.
You say you don't have time for it, and as someone once said about prayer, you don't have time not to.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting you talk about that, reading the Proverbs, because there have been several times over the years that instead of reading through the Bible, I've just read through Proverbs over and over and over again for 6-8 months at a time, because there is such practical wisdom there. But I think that one of the things that I recognized that really was easy to slip in the beginning was to be able to just basically, I'll just sit and watch the news, and then we'll watch a movie, and you start filling your day with all those digital. Well, I can just say I have to limit my viewing of news programs, because it just really affects my perspectives, and I think that, I know that everyone thinks like the source of their information is the valid one, the best one. And I'm just saying that just because somebody has a strongly held position doesn't necessarily mean that it's a correct one. And you have to filter that opinion through your own walk, because I find that even sometimes people who would profess to be believers, and I think they really are and genuinely sincere, but they're exercised over some issue that they want you to get exercised over. And you can end up really becoming reactive. And that's one of the dangers I see in the church right now, is that we're becoming polarized over the dynamics that are going on in the work. It's kind of like when you look at this whole thing with George Floyd, I think the sad thing is that there's just no way to feel good about what happened. What happened, there's no and it creates so much emotion inside of you that it's easy. I kind of get where people become so angry at the cops, and yet there's a general unfairness in that. When you got 800,000 police officers in the country, and you have this one guy who not only shouldn't have had a badge, he shouldn't have never been given a gun, and why he was still on the force, it raises some serious questions that they have to deal with in Minneapolis. But at the same time, we find, and when these kind of things happen, people become so reactive. I love what Attorney General Barr said about the investigations that are going on regarding Russiagate and Ukrainegate and all this kind of stuff. And he said, I know it seems like people like this is taking so long, but he says, because the law is based upon a due process, and because we have rules of jurisprudence, we have to go through the process. It takes long, but the chances of getting it wrong are less. And I thought there's some wisdom there, because I think that even in this situation, we'll never know the whole story for a while, at least till Netflix makes a movie on it or something, and then we probably won't know the story at all. But that's the whole point, is that there's so many factors that come into these situations, and it takes time to vet all that stuff. So.
Yeah, I read something this week that it just really made me think. And they said the reason that they call it a program when referring to us watching TV is because that's what's happening. We're watching it, and we're being programmed. And as you said, like, you have to limit your intake, because you just realize that, like, there is a message. And in the same way that, it's been said that, we're going to worship something, we're going to be programmed by something.
Yeah.
We can either be intentional about saying, I'm going to be programmed by the Word of God, and that's going to be the staple in my life.
Yeah.
If you're not, you're going to be programmed by something, and I guarantee you it's not going to be based on the Word of God. It'll be based on, other things. But I think the other thing, when you say there's no good way to view what happened in that situation, the thing that comes to mind there is, as it relates to change, I think that the way that we see a lot of people handling it right now is just, it's their reaction to change. Things are changing, things are happening that we don't like, and you see around the country now, we're just trying to remove all of those things that we don't feel good, that don't make us feel good about ourselves. And instead of, taking the advice or the wisdom, I would even say, from a philosopher who said, if we don't remember history, we're doomed to repeat it. The thing that I think about is the world that my kids are growing up into.
Yeah.
They're just going to have completely erased these things that we've learned and we've developed.
Yeah.
And if we do that, I would think that they're probably doomed to repeat the same mistakes.
I guess I would call myself an amateur historian, but I think the thing that really has helped give me perspective is if you study the history of revolutionary change, you look at not only the American Revolution, which is really a unique revolution in world history. There was so many things that had to be God. It couldn't have just unfolded by itself. But you look at it in the contrast, the French Revolution, which did the opposite. They rejected God, and you look where that led to even where they are today. You look at the changes all through Europe and these different countries over the centuries. The Venezuelan Revolution, the Cuban Revolution, and you realize that in every one of those cases there was first of all, there wasn't a foundation of biblical truth. That they didn't have a reference point that created a commonality of values. And what you see in most of these revolutions, they have a commonality of hurts and offenses, and a commonality in poverty, and a commonality in powerlessness. But there isn't really that philosophical, and maybe people prefer a theological, but nonetheless it's a philosophical foundation that we agree that these are inalienable truths. They don't have that, and as a result, what you have is people who have been powerless suddenly have power, and they usually use it savagely, because there's a lot of striking out and there's a lot of violence, and these are people who, whether it's feeling powerless over their own emotional condition or feeling powerless because of their life situation, they end up destroying the very things that they're going to need to rebuild their lives. And that's what decimated. That's why it's interesting when you look at the French Revolution. It went from the incredible oppression of the church and of the Louis to basically the anarchy that reigned through this period after the revolution, ending up in basically the tyranny of Napoleon. It's you just look at it and just go, it just led from chaos and destruction for decades. It happened. I mean, the French suffered for decades because of not having a foundation.
Well, we got one more question here. This one's kind of, I guess, subjective, but on a scale of 1 to 10, I could probably answer this one for you, but how risk-adverse are you? 1 being you love change, or 10 being you hate change? And why do you feel this way about change?
Yeah. Well, I don't. Contrary to belief, some people think I'm into risk. I'm not a risk taker in an extreme sense, but what I am is I believe in being decisive. It's indecision that creates the greatest tension and conflict in my life, because not to make a decision, as we've often said, it is a decision, and the change will just roll over the top of you, and you won't know what hit you. To try to revert, as I mentioned in the message, back to some former position usually doesn't work, because you end up becoming marginalized. And we have all sorts of examples in our history of groups of people who have tried to unplug and get off the grid and live in these communities. It reminds me of one guy who was pushing really hard for what was a kind of a fad the last decade of the home church model. He said that's the way it should be. Right. And I mean, I don't have anything against home churches, but later on, after he'd been in for a season, he made an interesting comment. He says, I found that I had the same problems in the home church that I had in the big church. Yeah. People are people. So I mean, it's one of those kind of things that people are always looking for that formula. In American history, we have quite a history of utopian movements, where it was the Quakers, the Shakers, or different groups who thought they would pull away and create this, even with Jonestown or David Koresh and his group, and they all had the same idea. We're going to break off from the world because we're going to become this select group of people. And there is no such thing as a select humanity. It's all fallen. And it's when we do that, we lose our humility. And so I just think that I was thinking about working on the idea for a devotional. One of the things that came to my mind was Elon Musk's naming of his new child. And it's a name that I don't even know how to pronounce it. It's not really letters, it's just, and I thought, it's interesting. Here's a man who believes in transhumanism, and instead of giving his child a name, he gives the number.
Yeah.
And I thought that is an interesting way, because the idea that if we can become transhuman, part human and part machine, that will eliminate the vagaries and the deficiencies of human nature. It's impossible.
Yeah.
Human nature is fallen. The only thing that can redeem us is the change that comes from Christ.
Yeah. No, I think that probably most people aren't really into accepting change or aren't really for it, I would say, unless they've spent time, I guess, growing in that area, because I think it's the same thing with a lot of things. If you don't come out of the womb just being ready to accept change all the time. In fact, we become creatures of habit. We like the things that we like. We stay around those things. And unless we stretch ourselves, we kind of stay that way. And something I read this morning in Proverbs is sometimes we think that not only do we only like the things that we like, but we feel like we're pretty strong in what we're doing.
Yeah.
And in Proverbs 24, it says, if we fall in times of trouble, how small is our strength?
Yeah.
And I think that, probably going into this season, we thought we were doing pretty good.
Yeah.
And then trouble hits, and as we start to start falling apart, we start to realize like maybe we're not nearly as resilient as we thought that we were. But the thing that I've been challenged with is, as you said in the message, not only is change inevitable, but it's avoidable as well. So, for me, it just challenges me to do certain things or put certain patterns or habits into my life to get me used to change.
Yeah.
Whether that's sometimes just going out and doing something new, or for me over the past year, this is the first year that I've, really got into actually reading any fiction books. Because before that, I was just like, no, I'm not. But I've just found that it's caused a part of my brain to function that was just kind of dormant for a while, I guess.
Yeah.
And just trying new things. I mean, I know you've mentioned this too, and I saw this even with my own grandma, but it's one of the things, again, that is kind of a deterrent for dementia, is to just continually learning new things, continually not letting your brain just go on cruise control. And I think the same thing is, we know change is going to come. We don't know when it's going to come, but change is going to come. And so I think that the more that we can prepare ourselves to be ready to adapt to change, I'd say probably the overall healthier we'd be.
Yeah, I was reading something by Chuck Swindoll recently where he was, here's a guy who's in his 80s now, and he still seems to be pretty sharp. And he talked about not allowing yourself to let down and to stop being challenged, not allowing that to happen in your life. And I think there's a temptation, because I think more and more about how that I kind of dream in my mind sometimes, just kind of gliding and abiding, and I think that's our natural want. I mean, we think about how I was thinking about how that we when you look at things that are promoted on TV, I think like Publishers Clearinghouse or the lottery, and they always portray this, $5,000 a week for the rest of your life.
Right.
What would that be like? And I would probably live for a week. But here, it's kind of like this idea that somehow all of my problems are going to evaporate, and the studies have found that those people who do win those things end up destroying their lives and their families and their relationships, because it not only brings out the greed factor in people around you and yourself, but it fails to deliver. Like I talked about last time, the bucket list approach to life. I'm going to fill up my bucket list, and you filled it up and you look in, it's still empty.
Right.
Because it just can't be found here. So I think that's, part of the issue is that we need to be challenging ourselves, but why are we challenging ourselves? And I think Paul put it into the Philippians. He said in chapter 3 that I press on to the prize of the high calling in Christ Jesus. That's why I think in terms of my Christianity, there is no place for retirement. I mean, sure, many people retire from careers, and I get why they do that. But the idea of me, even if I get to a place where I can't lead this church, I can't see myself retiring from the gospel, time where the work of the kingdom. That's somewhere I would have God. I know that God would place me if I'm willing. So, it's interesting. I read the testimony of a missionary one time who was a pastor of a small church, and he lived alone with his mother, who he cared for, and she eventually passed away, and he reached his 80s and he retired. And he thought, what am I going to do with my life? And somehow he just heard this word from God, why don't you go to India? So he visited India, and he discovered in India the elderly are revered. And he had this powerful ministry for the next decade because of his age and his spirituality. These people would listen to him, and he was leading people to Christ left and right and building churches and discipling people. And he lived well into his 90s before he passed away. But his real ministry didn't come until he thought his ministry would be over. And I thought, that's a Moses model, you know? Mm-hmm. That's where you see at 80, when you're ready to pack it in, mm-hmm. God says, okay, now we're ready to begin. And my wife has rebuked me several times when I start talking about, well, you know, I'm getting up there in years. I feel like it's just going, she says, you know, that's stupid talk. And because I think that's the reality, is that we have to stay engaged in life. And when we talk about being engaged in ministry, we're talking about basically connecting with people. And I look at this point in my life and I suddenly realize I connect with people far better today than I ever have in my life, because even my younger years, the mission was more important than the people that we were trying to facilitate it. And to flip that in your life, when we realize, you know what, the people are more important, not that they're more important than the mission, but the people are the mission. Yeah. And if you focus on investing in the people, then the mission will go forward all on its own, and not because you're dragging it uphill. Yeah. So that's why I told the board yesterday, I said, even doing this kind of online stuff with the digital world, I said, I'm beginning to feel like Sisyphus, you know, I keep on pushing the stone up the hill and then it rolls back on me. It's like, it's not a comfort zone for me. But at the same time, it's what God has ordained.
Yeah, I think you said it's not a comfort zone. And I guess the encouragement I guess I would give is that just like any habit, the longer you wait to get started, the more we dig our heels in the sand. Yeah. And so if you just aren't knowing or expecting that change is going to come, and so you just are stuck in what you're doing, longer that goes on, when that moment comes, that change comes, it's just that much harder to get going. You do feel stuck.
Yeah.
And so,
well, it's like that saying that, you know, when a unstoppable force encounters an immovable obstacle, something's going to break. Something's going to blow apart. And I think that where a lot of people are trying to figure out, how did my life blow apart the way it did? Well, it may have been because you weren't listening to God, and you wouldn't stop. Yeah. And God says, I'm going to put an obstacle in front of you can't get past. And bang, there's a crash and explosion. It's terrible, it's painful, it's difficult, but it's better than it not happening.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess the thing is, as you said a few weeks ago, God doesn't change, and so we must.
Yeah, amen.
Well, I always enjoy these conversations. I hope it's helpful for people watching it out there. Again, if you want to continue the conversation, you can join one of our currently online small groups, have a conversation with a group of people, and really just work these things out in your own life. But you want to close us out in prayer?
I will. Father, I do thank you for the ability to do what we're doing during this season, and we do so much look forward to the time when we began to do ministry like this face to face, that we share our lives together and walk together. We pray, Lord, that you would just continue to do a work, that we would focus on those good things that you've learned us. We wouldn't let those things slip away as we move forward with our lives and they come back to some kind of semblance of familiarity, never forgetting that we're really never going to be quite the same again. The world is going to change around us, and if we're going to stay relevant, we have to change with it, Father. So, Lord, I just pray that you'd give us that wisdom and that grace to know when we're to do what we're supposed to do and move when we're supposed to move, that we might conform ourselves to the perfection of your purpose and your will and not our own. We ask in Jesus' name, amen.